to host in-person ceremonies outside to reduce the spread of the virus, though the recirculation of air from HVAC systems is really critical. They need to use school system employees to screen individuals prior to entry for any of the following signs or symptoms of COVID. Consider requiring all employees, students, or other visitors to wear cloth mask coverings, face coverings, over the nose and mouth while inside any facilities. And if they will come within 6 feet of another person who is not a member of that person's household, except when photos are taken or speeches are delivered, they should avoid that kind of contact. Make hand sanitizer and hand washing stations available at all entrances, and wear gloves if diplomas and other items will be passed out person to person. Before we go on, I just want to double check and make sure I didn't get an alert saying you said something wrong. So I'm just double checking. This is all, by the way, in writing in the FAQs. In addition to the graduation guidance, you will find in the FAQs information about summer school as well. Districts may have in summer school beginning, in-person summer school beginning with phase 2 of the hours plan, of the governor's plan, but schools are encouraged to conduct summer school by virtual means whenever possible, or adopt social distancing guidelines, limiting classes to no more than 10 students at a time, or maintaining 6 feet space between each student. As OSDE encourages school districts to be aware of the provisions of the hours plan as it impacts the reopening and provision of services by schools. So please review that. And especially as phase 2 does look like it will be occurring on this Friday. School building access. Schools should consider adopting and implementing policies to screen individuals prior to entering school facilities. As part of these policies, OSDE encourages the screening of all school employees before they access a school facility, or any of the following new or worsening symptoms or signs or symptoms of possible COVID-19. So please reference the FAQs for these symptoms. If a school employee or a student has tested positive for COVID-19, they may not visit a school facility until the following criteria are met. And there are 3 things to consider. First, at least 3 days or 72 hours have passed since recovery or resolution of fever without the use of a fever-reducing medication. And number 2, the individual has improved in respiratory symptoms, so no cough, shortness of breath, etc. And 3, at least 7 days have passed since the symptoms first appeared. If a student or staff member tests positive for COVID-19, the school is strongly encouraged to close for at least the remainder of the day they are notified, and potentially longer, while the Department of Health investigates and sets forth a plan for any further precautionary measures that the school must take to contain exposure. Such a plan may result in additional closure. During this time, areas of the school building where the individual spent more than 30 minutes should be disinfected in accordance with guidelines from the Oklahoma State Department of Health with approved cleaners. Okay, let's talk about school buses. OSDE Oklahoma recommends distancing be practiced on transportation routes by separating students with at least 1 empty seat between them and in staggered rows. Districts should also consider staggering transportation times and routes to reduce the number of students on a bus at the same time. OSDE strongly encourages leaving the windows down whenever possible to increase the flow of fresh air to significantly reduce the likelihood of transmission. So this is really, really key. And it's actually some new guidance that we think will help simulate the bus route and drive time to being outdoors. And we know that that is healthier with transmission, reducing the transmission. Districts should also anticipate issues regarding the health and safety of drivers and other transportation staff, as many may be in a population vulnerable to COVID-19 or concerned about the risk of transmission. In light of these circumstances, districts should develop contingency plans and anticipate required numbers of drivers and buses in light of health, safety, and budgetary considerations. School calendars, let's look at that as well. In order to prepare for intermittent short-term and possibly even long-term disruption in the fall, districts should consider adopting multiple calendars for the 2021 school year, including one as a primary and others as contingencies. Plans should include traditional on-site operations, modified and rolling closure and disruptions, and a longer-term continuous learning through distance means. OSD also encourages districts to consider an early start, a traditional start, and a late start, and incorporate plans for virtual or distance learning days. This will help us all be prepared. School boards may also consider adopting policies, including authorizing the superintendent to make calendar adjustments as necessary in the short term for virtual instruction to ensure equitable resource allocation to all students, and to define attendance and absence requirements for students and staff. I know the next topic is on the minds of a lot of you right now, and that is virtual learning days. So let's talk about that for a moment. Schools are allowed to incorporate virtual learning days into their adopted calendars and have those days count towards student attendance and the required minimum days and hours. At a minimum, the following are required when planning for virtual days. Policies in place regarding the school calendar and when virtual days will be implemented school-wide include notifying all students and staff in advance of implementing a virtual day, setting expectations, and communicating how and when students will be expected to participate, including consequences for failure to do so. Number 2, attendance and absence policies are in place for students and staff for virtual days. Number 3, resources, instructional technology and equipment, including but not limited to devices and connectivity, are provided free of charge to all students to ensure they have the ability to access the virtual instruction. And if not, that equitable measures are in place and provided to students free of charge. And 4th, all grade courses are designed in a manner that facilitates and appropriately aligns with the Oklahoma academic standards. A final note on this 3rd point, actually, regarding resource allocations. While a district is not required to provide technology to all students, the district must ensure that academic work is equivalent in rigor to typical classwork and ensure that all students can participate. Once these requirements have been considered and adopted, a district may elect to incorporate virtual learning into its school calendar and have such days count as an instructional attendance day for state funding and compliance purposes. Attendance for virtual days is another topic in our final one. Districts have local discretion over adopting an attendance policy governing virtual instructional days. However, OSDE encourages districts to consult with other available resources prior to adoption of a local policy governing attendance of students for virtual instruction, including but not limited to the statutory requirements for statewide virtual charter schools, which has actually just been improved under the passage of House Bill 2905 this week. So please avail yourself of those updates. And with that said, I will open things up for the chat, and it'll take me just a second to be able to get to where I can see some of this and all of you. All right, so I think Carolyn is going to facilitate any of the questions that might be coming. And also for those of you who have seen the FAQs, if there are any clarifications that we need to provide, we're happy to do that now.
Yes, hi Superintendent, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, very good. I think we've just had a couple of points that need to be clarified, just maybe people didn't catch as you were going through your talking points. So we did have a request for clarification regarding when an in-person graduation ceremony could begin with phase 2, and when is that expected?
All righty. Would you want to go ahead so that I do not answer that based on what let me pull that back up, or you could just answer it. Or
and
Brad.
Maybe Brad could jump in.
Okay, that'd be great.
Sure, happy to. As it set out in the recently released FAQs, the in-person ceremonies can begin once we enter phase 2, which is currently on target, slated to begin Friday, May 15th. With that said, the OSDE is encouraging waiting until or after June 1st to hold those in-person ceremonies.
Just a reminder, when we talked earlier with the governor about this, it was his expressed opinion that he was not comfortable with a traditional service or ceremony for graduation until after June 1, that even though we would be in phase 2. However, please review the FAQs that describe how to accomplish that if you are doing that outdoors with social distancing. And again, this all does very much matter in the context of the size of your graduating class, the numbers of people. And I just want to take a moment to really express my appreciation for the creativity in how districts have managed to honor their graduates and do that in a way that also keeps them safer and respects the fact that many family members want to participate and yet would be at risk if there was not social distancing being upheld. So thank you. We're very proud of what many of you have already done.
Okay, very good. Next topic, I've had a couple of questions about virtual days for attendance, and I think this is something that might be new to a lot of districts and we might want to dig in on. Can a school have virtual days for attendance even if they are not one-to-one with technology?
And we did just answer that, so you'll be able to look at that a little more closely in the FAQs. Brad, would you want to add any additional comments about the law and where we are?
Sure, and Superintendent, I appreciate you referring to that. It is in the FAQs on page 9 and then continuing on page 10. The short answer is that this is a local control decision on attendance policies. Districts have the discretion, the flexibility to look at other options and means to define how they measure attendance for these virtual days. One of the mechanisms that could be in place, and we've said this previously, is borrowing in whole or in part what is required in statute of the statewide virtual charter schools. Not suggesting that, it's just an option. Again, it is a local control decision. We'd be happy to help out with that as we can.
Very good.
Okay, and we've had a question about summer reading academies, and I know that we've gotten this question a number of times, and we have actually answered it finally in the FAQs. Can a summer reading academy be virtual? Well, and then there's a question with the federal times required. I'm not exactly sure what that part is referring to, but Brad, would you like to talk about summer reading academies?
Sure. Those can be held virtually, and I think OSDE would encourage that to be done to the extent it's feasible. With respect to the timelines, I believe that's a reference to what is in administrative rules. In part requires that those be held for 4 weeks in length, half a day for 4 days a week. Not sure that that's actually in federal law or regulation, but I believe that's where that comes from. Again, these can be held virtually, and we're looking at the timelines that are required. As of now, those have to be complied with.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm trying to weed through and
I
filter
know.
questions.
I'm looking at those too.
Is there any limit on how many virtual learning days could be added to the calendar, or is there a suggestion for how many virtual days a district might consider adding?
There is not a limit in statute or rule. I think this is going to depend almost certainly on each local determination as to what the best need and fit is for that community. Again, there's not a limit or requirement in statute or rule, but it's something else that we'd be happy to work through. I think Aaron's on the line. He may be able to help with this as well.
Yes, Superintendent Brad, I am on the line. This is Aaron Espolt. We will be providing with our release guidance for our reopening additional support for districts as they think their way through this. One of the categories that we'll be covering is this inclusion of distance learning days within a traditional calendar, how the best practices, as well as some of the legal components to do that. So I would just encourage districts. I know time is of the essence of planning. We're getting that guidance put together rapidly and should have it ready to go out with our guidance to reopen.
Just in terms of a timeline for you, it is our plan to have that before Memorial Day. Our hope is to be able, we want it to be out as fast as possible. Next week is an internal goal we have, so I'll just share that with you just to help you as you are planning and to know what to expect. But we are working very hard to get that finished, a framework that you can work from.
Okay, questions still about school calendar and virtual days. What kind of considerations should districts be thinking about for example, virtual days throughout the year for certain weeks to minimize students in the classroom, or like a week in person followed by a week virtual? Are there any suggestions about what that might look like or recommendations for districts to think about as they're crafting those calendars?
Well, I think this is also part of thinking through how we do school at a time where we do have we expect there will be times of closure as a response to the path of the coronavirus. But I think planning to keep students in the connected and kind of assimilating this type of practice and this model of delivery as something that could be ongoing as a way to make it feel a little bit more seamless when we do have to do that, I think is a smart consideration. Brad or others, please feel free to make comment as well.
Nothing here. I think that was perfect. Well said.
Yeah, and this is Carolyn. It's worth mentioning that there are a number of suggestions in the new FAQs for how you might think about organizing your calendar. Again, all of them just suggestions and things for you to think about, not necessarily requirements. So you might consult those and that will give you a little bit more context for those decisions. Superintendent, we've had a question about Little League baseball or softball that those groups are asking for access to school facilities. Is that allowed at this time and for them to practice and play games?
Okay, first, before I answer that, let me just ask, because I know we've had a lot of conversation with the epidemiologist about this as well. So did we put that in the FAQs? Or are we putting that in the framework? Brad or Carolyn or Phil?
It's not in the FAQs. It should be in the framework, I believe.
All right.
Correct. We haven't directly addressed it, but there are a number of questions regarding access to school facilities and how to plan for that. So there's generally some recommendations, but not specific to a Little League baseball or softball or other types of outside entities that are wanting to access school facilities. Brad, any thoughts? Or sorry, Superintendent, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, before we try to answer that, I think it's the most fair thing for us is to not be ahead of the conversations that are ongoing and need to occur with OSSAA. And but in general, what we are learning about the evidence of transmission is that outside is always better than inside. So I think it's going to be something that people need to look at sport by sport. And you can make a comparison between outdoor Little League and indoor wrestling, and there's quite a difference. So to just talk about sports in general would be really, I think, inappropriate, but to look at the context of each is going to be more of a prudent policy going forward. And the ability to apply the social distancing that we have right now in place is going to still be key in terms of how people gather and remain in groups longer than 30 minutes at a time. So the focus is more on the concern about others that are in the audience and where they are going to be situated. But you can see that the way Little League is spread out, it could be something that's doable. And the concern would be more about the dugout and how guidance is placed there. So we want to have specific answers for that, but I also want to have conversation and reach an understanding with David Jackson.
Okay, next question. There's been a question for an update on any companies that would be providing a state bid or be on state contract for devices or hotspots. Any update on that?
Yes, we are working on that. And it is also something that we will have when we're able to open the framework and publish that we would like to be able to include for you. So some of the timing is going to depend on our ability to get this work done. But please know, we are working to provide updated opportunities at a state level, and then also hope that some of the CARES Act relief funds will be used this way, and that there's also additional support that we are advocating for at the federal level and talking right now with our federal delegation about the important need. The amount to schools represented a very, very small portion of the CARES Act, and there is new efforts, as I know you are following as well, to provide additional support, as the amount that was given was just not enough to be able to cover the new expenses and the need related to a robust, safe environment.
Okay, we have a question about CARES Act grants, and I believe this is specifically referring to the possibility for additional funds from the state in the incentive grant.
Yes.
There was a question about purchasing an LMS or CMS that is on a state contract. Is it limited to those that are on a state contract, or when will that information about applying for that grant be provided to districts?
Yes, and my hope is that we will have that ironed out when we release the framework. But that may be still something that we're negotiating and may absolutely just, not be, it may not be possible at that moment, but that's our goal. Our hope is to be able to provide you with as much information so you can make decisions about how you want to spend your funds. We are right now working to try to expand our capacity to offer more resources to districts through other partnerships. So please stay tuned on that. And just know that we are aggressively working to leverage any advantage we can to get our districts and their federal relief dollars to stretch as far as possible. So we are working on that very, very, very aggressively. And anybody on our team that wants to speak up, feel free. I don't want to be the only one contributing to an answer if you have more to say.
I think that was accurate, Superintendent. The next question that we have is regarding personnel returning to work. Have had a couple of questions come in about that. And when can a district have personnel return to work, specifically 12-month personnel that are on that continuing 12-month contract?
I'll let Brad take this.
Yeah, so I'm going to take this in a number of different parts here. I don't think this really changes from anything that was a local determination about essential personnel. Obviously, back in the spring and early March, that was where this was, where it was going, and what the authority was essential personnel. The second part of that is as we continue on and enter into phase 2 and perhaps so on. I believe it extends beyond the essential personnel, and you can see that reflected in our FAQs on summer school activities and other activities. But I think it's a local decision. I think this may actually be included in the FAQs. We would just strongly encourage considerations and accommodations for individuals who are in that vulnerable population, compromised systems, or over a particular age limit. So take those into consideration and always exercise common sense.
Okay, I have a question about whether or not a district can make provisions for students whose parents feel uncomfortable sending them to school physically in the fall. Can single students be placed on virtual learning if there is if they lack the comfort level to actually be in the school building?
Superintendent, I'm
yes.
happy to jump in. I was actually responding to this in the chat box just now. So no, I don't think that is an option unless the student is on a homebound placement or some other placement decision that has been made by the student's IEP team. Quite frankly, I think that's a dangerous, slippery slope to go down when we start putting individual students without an IEP determination or a placement decision of some sort individually in the context of what we've addressed on virtual days and attendance requirements and so forth. That's all in the context of a scheduled day for the entire school, and the FAQs reflect that as well.
We know that's very, very likely a conversation that's going to be between parents and school districts all across the state. So we understand that you are going to have very clear policies about this. And thank you, Brad, for providing some initial information. Now, let me just ask this, Brad. If you have, would there be the opportunity through a virtual academy within the district if they are able to be a part of something that is formally set up for that purpose, that's expanded to additional grades? Perhaps it's already in place. Just
Yeah, absolutely. My comments weren't intended to go away from that at all. It was more, at least I understood the question about, can we take a particular student who may not be comfortable for any given reason, and put that student on a virtual plan on our own without the student weighing in and stuff. So of course, conversations can and should occur, and if it's a part of what the district has in place for their virtual program, I think yes.
And we also know there's going to be occurrences where doctors have said this child is quarantined, or this family is quarantined, or the health department may say that we have a school that needs to be closed for 14 days. Being prepared for those kinds of contingency plans are what we are advising, particularly with our conversation around multiple calendars and delivery of school, to try and mitigate as the potential disruption until there's a vaccine. We all recognize that, I presume.
Superintendent, this is Aaron. I just wanted to jump in to help clarify just a little bit with what Brad was saying. Is there will also be guidance coming out as part of our framework as well on the blended and fully virtual options for school districts to include within their traditional offerings, and things to consider and think about and work through ways to do that. And so while there's many different lanes that we'll have to look at and go through the seamless transitions in and out of schools, I just wanted to make sure the schools were thinking about the different options. And one option is to have the blended and virtual opportunities for students. And another option would be for the distance learning days built into the calendar, like we've already spoke to. So these are all kind of different lanes as we work through this, and the guidance will be provided in that framework moving forward.
Superintendent, would you have any suggestions about how districts might be able to secure PPE or personal protective equipment for their staff?
And we also know that this is costly. So I think Phil philbacharach possibly may have some thoughts about that, but that is something that we want very much to be able to point districts in the right direction regarding ordering supplies.
Yes, and I can say for what it's worth, we are currently in discussions with the State Department of Health with regard to that, but in the immediate term, I can tell you that Michael Ann Uten, who is part of the OSDE's Office of School Security, is our liaison to Oklahoma Office of Emergency Management. They have helped several dozen districts already get PPE at I believe at no cost to them, that primarily being face masks and gloves, but Michael Ann would be the person you guys want to contact.
Thank you.
Okay, would just kind of ask that if there are any remaining questions, you drop them in the chat box here. I think we've addressed many of these, if not specifically, generally, or by a chat response. So kind of one last opportunity here for folks to ask a question, and Superintendent, any comments that you might like to make in the interim, filibustering and whatnot.
I'm just reading. Oh, I think maybe Rob Miller missed, I don't know if he missed the opening, but yes, we have been and are working with the state epidemiologist, who is a public school parent of at least multiple kids right here in Oklahoma, of course, and sees this the way parents would. And they have a robust team that's actually caused us to think about things that we hadn't even considered. So yes, the whole point is to have, as we described on many other conversations in these various formats with districts, an aligned response, so that there will be a very clear understanding of what would need to occur when there are outbreaks within a community, or a particular diagnosis of COVID within a school, whether that be a school member of staff or student. And I'll just give you a hint a little bit more about how the evidence is pointing. The response is going to be different based on what they see. So if you have 2 cases within a school, it's a different response if those 2 cases are in the same classroom or in the same hall versus 2 in different parts of the campus. And they're not associated together. A lot of this will be based on the evidence through contact tracing as well. And what we are learning as Oklahoma, along with all the other states, are learning from the other countries that have gone back in and started school, and what they are starting to see emerge with any kind of outbreak, and what their particular model or protocol was. We have that outlined by country and are observing, learning from what they are doing and what the result is, because they will be ahead of us by many months. So this is very, very helpful. It actually puts us in a much better position when we think about starting back in August. Keep in mind that there's other states that have started school, and even not just in other countries, but here. And we closed our year out pretty early, and we'll be going back based on just tradition a little earlier than most do, but we will have much more information by the time August rolls around, or late July. And yes, very detailed decision tree is what we are working with the public health sector, both in the state government and those recognized as national leaders, looking at other organizations and institutions like Johns Hopkins, et cetera. So our goal here is to let science and evidence lead us, and to give you as much information as possible to make those kinds of determinations. But you should know you're not going to be making them alone. That will be with local health authorities as well. I hope that helps. Any other questions before we close out? Carolyn, I can't hear you if you're speaking.
No, I was waiting for maybe one last thing to pop into the chat box. And like I said, I think we've answered most all of these, either generally or specifically, or in the chat. So I think maybe we can wrap up.
Okay, I'm just trying to look at some of the comments. Again, please reach out to our federal delegation about how critical it is that we have the additional funding. If there is an additional relief package, we need to be included in that. And we know how dire this situation is, particularly in Oklahoma, where we are not only experiencing the change in 13% or so unemployment, but the downturn in the economy due to oil and gas conditions. And it is critical that Oklahoma have additional relief as you move into this next year. I mean, the collections are alarming right now when we are looking year over year. Okay, I guess, Carolyn?
Just some thank yous in the chat, no additional questions.
All right. I know there are some specific questions that are on here. We will download that and do our very best to either answer those in future FAQs. Again, please look at those FAQs. They are brand new. We've really overhauled the old FAQs, removed portions that are no longer applicable, and have added quite a bit of new information. So please refer back to those. Oh, there's other things asking me to speculate. I can't speculate. who knows? We just know in terms of budget, in terms of federal relief, what's going to happen here at the State House. We are just going to continue to think about the needs of our students and how we will find a way. And I will tell you, we will be looking and fighting for a way to be able to stretch dollars and we have applied for grants, as well as we'll be hoping to be able to leverage additional funds for you to make our set aside portion of our SDE CARES Act funds go even further. So we are working on it. I wish we had more clear answers right now, but I think it is more important to at least be available every Wednesday like this, even though we don't have all of the answers and everything tied up as neatly as I would like every week. Just keeping in touch is key, and it is really helpful for us to see your questions and to touch base with you. I just thank you for what you're doing. And again, you know how to reach us, and we appreciate you bringing those questions top of mind and those issues that you are working with. Again, thanks for the creativity and celebrating and honoring students and all of the hard work, a whole, a community effort to see students graduate and complete their work in secondary and move on. So I know this is just immense work that you are doing. And we have some good news that I hope you will look for related to the reduction in the need for remediation as students are moving into post-secondary. I'm not sure if that news release has gone out, but it is joint information that's being shared with higher education, and we are putting out a release either I believe today. Look for some good news with that. You guys have done monumental work in reducing an alarming trend of remediation rates. The need is dropping, and that is a great testament to your work. So I appreciate you on that. Look for that release if it's not out yet. All right. Well, with that, I will ask you to carry on and bring things to us, and we'll problem solve together. I appreciate all of you. Take care. Have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.